Welcome to That's Inclusive, where we talk about disability and what it means to live a full life engaging in our communities. What does that look like, and how can we work together to make our world a more inclusive place?
Hello and welcome to That's Inclusive podcast hosted by the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. I am Chase Eagleson. I am the Policy and Planning Coordinator for the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. Today I am joined by...
Hello everyone, I'm Peter Gustafson, Deputy Director at the C Science Center in Manchester, New Hampshire.
And I'm Shana Hawrylchak, Executive Director at the C Science Center.
I'm Nicole Cannan, and I'm the CEO of Unchartered Tutoring, and someone with a number of disabilities.
It's great to have all three of you guys here. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of inclusion, accessibility in scientific spaces, and it's fantastic to have everyone here to do this because it's a topic that does not get talked about enough. So let's just jump right into it. Often in scientific spaces, as well as pretty much every other field, we have conversations, programs, initiatives that circle around the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But often we seem to forget the accessibility aspect and disability aspect of inclusion as well. How do you think we can work to include disability more in these DEI spaces?
My first thought on it is really the whole DEI thing needs to change to DEIAJ, and that needs to be just the standard conversation because people have shared identities across multiple demographics, and the things that affect one person affect another.
I think we often find that people are so focused on permanent disability and really don't think about all of the sort of wide range of disabilities that occur throughout a person's lifetime. So we might have individuals that are suffering from aging disabilities, and so many of us are going to encounter disability during lifetime that it really doesn't make sense not to have this as a part of the conversation all the time. This affects everyone. It doesn't affect a small population.
And I do think that the conversation is getting more broad to include more and more individuals across a spectrum of needs and concerns. So I'm the eternal optimist. So I feel like it's getting better, and kind of things like this will help facilitate that.
Having this conversation alone is showing that things are changing for the better, hopefully. Going along with that previous question, all three of you are scientists in your own aspects. Why do you think inclusion is important in science?
I'd love to take this one. So I think like a huge part of science is innovation, and innovation comes when you have people coming from different perspectives and tackling a problem from a different angle, and that's where you really get a lot of those really creative solutions to problems. And if you have everyone exactly the same, coming from the same backgrounds, you are just minimizing the potential to come to a creative solution. So I think, as we're looking about just all the many backgrounds of folks, especially folks with disabilities, I know I've had multiple situations in my career where I've had a problem on the table, and someone who had that different perspective was able to solve that problem in about an eighth of the time as the rest of us, because they had a broader view of the challenge and other resources they could pull on. So I do feel like, particularly in a field that's all about innovation, you need different perspectives.
I think that's a great way of putting it. I also would say, there's the whole concept of nothing for us without us. And, when we conduct research that needs to happen to help people with disabilities in whatever way, whether it's testing a new device that will help someone get around or medical products like drugs, if people with disabilities aren't included in that conversation, a lot of abuses happen ultimately. And then, like you said, people with disabilities understand what their challenges are. They don't have to be told what they are.
I agree. It's like a guitar player trying to invent a new kind of piano. It's like it's not the right person to do the job. So I agree that having the right people in the room, you're going to get a better solution.
It does seem odd because science in itself is naturally meant to be inclusive. I mean, it encompasses everything. And then kind of putting exclusion into it is making it inherently non-scientific, which is kind of an odd thing that society decided to do.
Well, we find that with science a lot of the time. It gets siloed in this weird way outside of other life practices, from doing the dishes to gardening or, putting on your clothes each morning. And if we take science out of the equation, things just don't work.
Going along with that, despite disability becoming an increasingly important part of the conversation in science and individual disabilities becoming increasingly seen in scientific spaces, oftentimes the physical layout of labs or field sites and the design of instruments can render science literally inaccessible to some. And while the representation of disabled scientists has increased, and some scientists will choose not to disclose their disability due to exclusionary practices and entrenched ableism institutions. What are some ways you think that the scientific and STEM community can work to ensure that individuals living with disabilities feel both safe and welcome in scientific spaces? Kind of a big question, but
I have a lot to say on this one.
Go right ahead.
So one of my disabilities is a form of narcolepsy called idiopathic hypersomnia. And I used to just short call it narcolepsy. But recently NPR did a great 15-minute bit on it. Now people know what it is. And I worked in pharmaceuticals at the start of my career, clinical research, radiopharmaceuticals, all that kind of thing. And ultimately I came to a point where I could no longer grow my career because I needed to commute to Boston. And there's no way someone with a disability like mine, who can fall asleep very easily when driving, could work in Boston. So I think it comes down ultimately to infrastructure. I'd like to say that the labs are what need the work, but right now, people with disabilities, at least like mine or like some of my friends, they can't even get to the places where they want to work, whether it's sidewalks are blocked because cars are parking on them, or, in Manchester, I'm a highway commissioner explicitly for the purpose of advocating for good sidewalks and bike lanes. Oftentimes the sidewalks aren't plowed, so people can't walk places like me. And oftentimes people with disability devices are using the bike lanes in order to get around town, which is placing them very close to traffic. So our infrastructure, things like trains, things like regular public transportation are integral to being able to put disabled people in the places they want to work.
I think that there's also that, issue of ableism where there's so many very small changes or, things that we're creating barriers that just don't even need to be there. And I think, one of the things that's positive coming out of the pandemic is we realized that there was a lot of just things we took for granted about work and the workplace that we're starting to rethink. Like, do we actually need people to come into the office to do this job? Is it important that they come to this particular lab space, or could this be done in a different way? But there's all of these things that we sort of take for granted as being necessary that we need to rethink. Are they actually necessary to complete the job? And are there ways, to make accommodations for a whole range of people?
Speaking of scientific spaces, a hands-on museum is a scientific space, and we're working to become more welcoming to many different communities. The way we build exhibits. If you're in a wheelchair, can you roll under them and use them comfortably, or can we build them so you can roll beside them and use them comfortably? So it's all ways to get accessibility for different people with different needs. It could be putting Braille, right? You worked at a museum or a school for the blind. You can speak to some of the challenges there. But it's trying to recognize where you can make some even small changes that will allow someone with an issue to participate in something scientific.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, like the small changes. That becomes really important. For instance, I worked for an institution that had a dress code, even for the scientists in the lab, and it unfortunately required women to wear dress shoes. And I don't know if you've been you don't have to have been a chemist, just a person trying to stand and do anything in a dress shoe is very painful. And if we can sit down and look at what systems have we put in place that maybe don't make sense, and why should a woman have to ask for accommodations to wear a sneaker in a lab space? These things just don't make sense to me. So rethinking things like dress codes or, like requiring people to be in the office at a specific location at a certain time. There are people with narcolepsy that if they could work early mornings, sleep half the day, and then work late evenings, goodness, the things they could accomplish. But that's not often, accommodated. So we're not allowed to contribute.
Yeah, and I think like a consideration too, you're mentioning like the narcolepsy, but even like physically sitting in a chair at a desk is a very taxing thing for a whole lot of people who could very efficiently work in a home space with their own seating, which is appropriate to their body. I would also say, one thing we focus on a lot at the Science Center is the concept of universal design, because so many of the features which would make life easier for the disability community would also make life easier for everyone else. Just thinking of going in and out of a lab and having doors that you can open to bring your lab equipment in and out will help anyone using a mobility device. So those changes, again, are just so important, thinking about just the number of people who can be helped if you stop just doing everything as it has been done in the past. I know something we also talk a bit about at the Science Center is just trying to think my train of thought. Those small changes that Pete was mentioning, a lot of people, I think, have this notion that it's all about making things accessible for a wheelchair and just a broader definition of what disability is, so people can think about some of those tiny things you can do if you can't necessarily make a huge change to your physical space that will help a whole lot of people engage with the science at a deeper level.
I gotta say, just on the note of the dress shoes, because that threw me off a little bit, to be honest. I used to work in a lab that studied emerald ash borers, which is a little pest.
They're cool. They're cool.
They're
they're cool, but they're pests.
I hate them.
They're horrible.
But it before I started working the council, I didn't even think about the accessibility aspect of being in that lab. And there's so many just weird fine movement little machines that we had to use that honestly probably would have been better if they had more accessible tools and levers and things like that, because I couldn't even do it, and my hands are pretty good. I hope.
I do feel like too, a lot of lab spaces are really moving towards certain aspects being automated, because there is not a good reason for human beings to be doing some of that fine work where they can contaminate their specimens. Oh. So, I think there are some engineering solutions that are coming down the line. I know automation is not always everyone's favorite term, but it can be really helpful in a lab space where you don't need somebody doing a lot of fine motor skill stuff. It is sometimes better done by that machine that can't infuse the sample with biological contaminants.
Yeah, and along with what you said, right, you were, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing, you were talking about how the changes that can be made for people with disabilities then end up helping a lot more people, or it might help someone recognize the fact that they might need assistance and hadn't noticed it before. Things like, curb cuts is like we all think of for wheelchairs, right? But they end up helping parents in strollers and people trying to exercise on rollerblades, and it ends up helping a larger portion of the community. Of course, I'm so very infrastructure focused, but those changes in the lab too, like you said, like automation or bigger equipment, right? Levers instead of small turn dials, might even extend the working capability of someone who's developed rheumatoid arthritis or the natural aging process. You're either disabled now or not yet disabled if you're lucky, right?
Well, and if we think of those ahead of time, you might not get a work-related disability.
Exactly.
Because we design a lot of things that actually cause repetitive stress situations, which create disabilities for individuals because of the way our workplaces are designed.
It's so true. Like you think about standing on hard floors and that back strain, and it's very true.
I've been fortunate to take a few tours of manufacturing facilities lately, some exhibit research we've been doing. And, today's manufacturing facilities, they seem like they are taking into consideration some of these issues for people. Some of the workstations we've seen have seemed relatively comfortable and like they're not going to disfigure people after 20 years of work. And so I think some people are making changes because they have to, right? Because we've learned a little bit about what we're doing to ourselves with some of these work environments.
I mean, that perfectly goes into our next question. Thank you. What role do you think that science can or does take in ensuring that all voices are heard in scientific discussions? We talked a few minutes ago about how before people with disabilities were brought into these conversations, a lot of perspectives were just kind of left out. I mean, the same thing happened before women were brought in, before people of different ethnicities were brought into scientific spaces. So I'd just love to hear all of your opinions on that. I could see you already grabbing the mic. Go right for it.
So I think everybody, especially with AI conversations, data sets are so important. And, a lot of these data sets we're collecting, it involve everyone in the community getting in there and sharing their voices and the information in order for us to make good decisions. And if those voices aren't heard, our data sets are bad, we get bad outcomes. So especially even more as we enter into an AI world, we need all of that data and input in there.
That's beautiful. I also, I don't have a 3D printer. It's in my 2-year plan, but I don't have one right now. We have to take tools, certain purchases, large ones at steps. But I have benefited from people 3D printing things that made my life easier. I like to think of 3D printers. Like I remember I ran that event with the Sea Science Center years ago with the New Hampshire Creative Club, where we brought in all that 3D printing for that big holiday thing. And to me, a 3D printer being accessible to a school child is really important because that's the engineer's sketchbook. Like I'm an artist, right? I work in the sciences, but I'm an artist, and that my sketchbook went everywhere with me. I drew things, I doodled things, I changed things. And to an engineer, that's what a 3D printer is. And anyone who's trying to solve a problem is an engineer, right? So they need access to tools like 3D printers in affordable ways, or in school labs, or in museums, or maker spaces, all of that. I think that's one of the biggest areas for including people with disabilities in science and science in disability.
Well, I think it does come back to what Shana said earlier about having, more and maybe more appropriate people in the room to help solve the problem you're trying to solve. And so including people with challenges, they're going to help you find solutions if you include them. And I think that's the key, is making sure that the right voices are heard.
I would also say that especially in today's workforce climate, none of us can afford to exclude any population at all. So it's, we all need those perspectives, but we need the people. We all need those minds coming in and helping us out in these challenges and being in our workforce. So just saying that a fifth of the population we're going to ignore is just not a viable option for anyone, not just in the scientific community, but in any community.
Oh, and I want to add on to that. That is because that is so true. Like I have, for instance, I've heard of workplaces that didn't have any women in their group, so they used the women's bathroom as a storage room. So, like, just as an example, so there wasn't infrastructure for women to be in the workplace, right? So yeah, when women did come, they left very quickly. It was weird. So designing the workplace for people with disabilities before they arrive is the only way they're going to get there. You're not going to find a car in the middle of the woods with no road leading to it. Why do you expect to find a person with this disability in the middle of a city that's not, built appropriately, or in an office or a lab that doesn't already have these things in place? They're not going to come.
I would also say that we talk a lot about the entire path. So it's not just about the space, but it's how you frame how they're getting to you. So the data, like, do you present yourself on your website or your other materials as being welcoming to these communities? Because no one's going to, if they can't get to your door, they're not going to be in your building or be part of your workforce or be part of your community.
No, people with disabilities are fighting so much. So already they don't want to have to fight to have fun like at the Sea Science Center.
Well, and that's the point, that if we're ready in the Sea Science Center to welcome people with mobility issues, for instance, but they can't get to the building, right? There's a disconnect there, and bridging those disconnects is key, important. Yeah.
This is one of the few times I can shout out my economics degree. I just think it's really interesting that one aspect of this that a lot of people just don't talk about is how economically positive inclusion is. I mean, again, like you said, 1/5 of the population, actually the CDC puts it at 1/4 of the population. That's 25% of people that aren't working or have limited access to working. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that can be made, can be spent, and that's a lot of stuff that can be processed. I mean, it's a whole huge portion of the population that's just, it's like not tapping maple trees. It's bad.
That's probably the most New Hampshire idiom I think I've ever heard. I kind of love it.
I've been New Hampshire my whole life. It's just it's the maple syrup's ingrained in my soul at this point.
It's in your blood vein.
It's in my blood. It's all thick.
I wanted to add one thing onto what both Pete and Nicole were saying, is that, as businesses and in the scientific community, as we're advocating in our own spaces, the importance of advocating about the city itself and just outside of our organizations, because anything that makes it difficult for people to live and thrive is going to make it difficult for them to work or play in our spaces.
Yeah, so I'm fortunate I'm not in a wheelchair today, but I did spend a year in one and had to relearn to walk, and I would roll on downtown in Manchester and try to spend my money, but I couldn't even open the doors to get into the businesses. And that's aside from the, ways I was treated by the persons who then didn't assume I had a business with employees and wanted to spend money. So like things as little as having a doorbell at your business, when I can't open the door because I'm on wheels and in a narrow alcove, and then you can open the door and I can come spend my money.
Yeah, I remember I had this point in my life where I had an ACL, MCL tear. And so I was on crutches and realized too late that I could not actually exit my apartment building after my caretaker left.
No.
So I think we all take these things for granted, and then until we don't, and we can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that, again, just, being able to think about the obstacles we're creating for no reason is important, and stopping and taking that time.
100%. What did you do?
I called everyone I could think of to try to get out of my building.
Yeah.
Dove out the window.
Slide.
I know people hear this all the time, and it's going to keep getting said, but I mean, with an ever-aging population, these obstacles are only going to become more apparent to the public, which in a way is a good thing, but it is something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, or no one's going to be able to spend money or do anything anywhere or get out of their apartment. We're just going to have a bunch of people trapped in their apartments. This topic about voices being heard and more people having the need for accessible infrastructure brings into the next point of the fact that according to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, people with disabilities are underrepresented in STEM occupations in comparison with their share of the general U.S. population. STEM workers with disabilities earn less than those without as well. what, in your opinions, can be done to combat these inequalities? Big question. Have fun.
I think there's a lot of misinformation out there for employers. I think that they think there is going to be a larger burden on them than there actually is with making accommodations, and it really stops a lot of people from trying or recruiting among the disability community.
That's a great point.
I agree with that as someone who employs people, and I actually try to find people with disabilities to employ because I'm putting them in front of a classroom of children who, let's say, based on that data, a quarter of them will be disabled if they're not yet disabled. So they need to see someone who's functioning aligned with their disability. And it's really not that hard. Like for me, they got to have a wheelie cart maybe if they can't lift something, or we stomp loudly on the stairs so we don't shock their cataplexy. It's not that hard. And most people with disabilities are trying their darndest not to be a burden, maybe to their detriment.
Combating inequities, it takes advocacy, it takes transparency, it takes people who care to speak up and say things and do things. And so those are the things that will continue to happen as people want to see change. They have to be the change. They have to be willing to talk about it, do things about it, hire our way out of it. So yeah, it's the struggle for people. They need to continue to address it and speak about it so that it can be addressed by people in the community who have the power to make change.
I was going to say, I think it's also important, like, as a society, we've done a great job of, like, trying to get rid of some of the stigma around mental health, but there's also a lot of folks who, there's hidden disabilities that people won't talk about, and so people don't think about the accommodations or helping people through some of the struggles they may have with those hidden disabilities, because we are still in a society that pressures people to hide. And I don't think that's a healthy place to be in if we really want effective change.
I think that's a really, really great point. And you can edit this out if you want, but I am very open with my disabilities, and I'm going to list them here so that if anyone who has them can see me and see that they can do what I feel like I'm doing really well. And so I've got narcolepsy. I have a walking disability due to a tendon that turned to bone, pudendal neuralgia, along with various neuralgias around my body, so could be in pain at any moment, and endometriosis. So, and the pudendal neuralgia is one of those things that makes it hard for people to sit for extended periods, or even sometimes at all, which, so now I have a standing disability and a sitting disability. Anyways, I put that out there so that people can see that I'm a productive member of society. I seem to think so. But that, you can reach out to me with questions through my website or anything like that. I'll connect you with any of the resources I have. Able and H is really, really great. And I know you guys just had on Sarah, so kudos there. But being open about the disabilities means it could put me at risk for future employment. So I'm hanging my jacket on the hook that I'm going to be forever self-employed and try to employ those with disabilities. Just provide opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you were mentioning it before, like for kids, we see it all the time. Representation is so important to encourage them to go into the fields. And while, we're focused right here on STEM, I'm pretty sure there's underrepresentation in almost every work field with the disability population. The unemployment is very high because of, again, some of the stigma and misinformation that's out there that keeps people out of the workforce.
I will say that we won't be editing that out, Amber.
That's fine.
And I dare someone not to hire you based on it. That will be a fun fight.
Fortunately, I'm not applying anywhere. I'm looking for people to hire. So,
even better.
The tables are turned.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for talking about this with us today. If you'd like to reach out to Amber or Shana or I've just called you Gus.
I could see that.
I'd love for you guys to say your contact information.
Oh, sure. My website, unchartered.org, is a really great way to get a hold of me. And actually, that form goes directly to my inbox. So you will get me directly. That's probably the best way. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, sometimes TikTok, and you can find me in all those places. And then if you like my personal art, where I do more on disability, that's bioscicreative.com.
The SEE Science Center is in Manchester, New Hampshire, SEE Science Center. We're in the Mill Yard. We're a hands-on science museum. We do summer camps, a lot of field trips, family memberships.
It's a cool place.
It is a fun place to learn and have fun at the same time with your family.
Yeah, and you can get a hold of either me or Pete. I'm Shana, Shana, at SEE-Science Center, all one word, .org, or Pete. Same rest of the email.
Yeah, I gotta say, even if you don't like science for some reason, they have a really cool Lego set that I would recommend checking out.
It's true.
Yes.
It's true.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Vanessa Blaze, and this was a production of the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities, produced by Isadora Rodriguez-Legendre and Vanessa Blaze, with many thanks to Josh Hardy and the rest of the crew here at Concord TV. We love to have guests with differing perspectives. These views are personal and do not necessarily represent those of the DD Council.